Hey, what's up YouTube? It's that time of year again where we go into the most popular Sentinel builds in week 3 to 4. And this is a pretty interesting video in the sense that you can kind of see how much the meta has shifted away from the super meta league starters that do have some quality of life issues. A lot of people do complain that Seismic Trap is not exactly the best clear, or they just want to play a slightly different build than minions all the time. But there is one build that stands head and shoulders above every other build, and it is Righteous Fire. It's pretty crazy how good it is because last league, Righteous Fire was nowhere even in the top 5, and people completely wrote it off. I do think that part of the reason is that pretty good guides have been put out on YouTube, and the fact that a lot of people have realized that Melding and Aegis Aurora is probably one of the most broken combinations in PoE today, especially if you have defense issues. And since a lot of people want to do the Uber bosses, guess what? Perfect opportunity to use a really defensive character. But let's go straight into it. But before we start, I do have something interesting to show you. And this is the passive tree heat map. Now, this is something you can see on PoE Ninja. Not really sure how many people actually pay attention to it, but there's a button here called Show Passive Tree Heat Map. And wow, it's so colorful, right? But basically, what this shows you is what nodes that most people take on the passive tree. Now, if you look at it, this tree looks very similar. If you've ever played an aura stacker, this is exactly a Scion aura stacker tree, especially where the greens are, is that you take these nodes in the middle, you put the jewel sockets in, then you get every single aura cluster right here, charisma over here, influence over here, and sovereignty. And then you take the cluster jewels here, and then cluster jewels here, and this is Zealot's Oath purely because of Righteous Fire, I'm pretty sure. Or is it because of Righteous Fire? I'm not 100% sure, but this is Zealot's Oath. But basically, you can see here that there's a huge priority on the top side of the tree, leading to Inquisitors, Witches being the most popular builds or classes. And Aura nodes are completely busted. Everyone takes the Aura nodes here. You use Champion of the Cause, and all of the Aura nodes are taken. Now, cluster jewels are something that every single person on the top side of the tree generally take. And I do think that there's not that many life nodes on the top side of the tree. So most people default into taking aura clusters and cluster jewels. Now, this is a purely identical tree to aura stacker in the past. And it's kind of sad to see how little people use the bottom side of the tree. The right side of the tree is kind of used for some rangers and bow builds. But other than that, top side dominant completely. Now, we did do one of these videos earlier on at the end of week 1, and what we saw was that Righteous Fire dominated with Seismic Trap, Summon Skeletons, and Explosive Arrow right behind. You have Righteous Fire at around 14%, Seismic Trap at 10%, Summon Skeletons at 9%, Explosive Arrow still super popular at 9%, and Lightning Strike down below at 9%. So it's a pretty diverse and equivalent meta. Now, the nice thing to know about all of these builds are that all of these builds require very little currency investment while also being exceptionally good at bossing. All of these builds are pretty tanky. They have a pretty good playstyle for bossing. Like Righteous Fire, you're incredibly tanky. Seismic Trap, you do infinite damage and you can pre-stack your damage. Summon Skeletons, you're pretty much a minion build. You can just run around while your minions kill everything. EA Totems is the exact same thing. You put your totems down, you're super tanky. You might have some recovery issues, but other than that, you do infinite damage, and the bosses are all able to be killed really easily. Now, these are all the best league starters that people recommended, and they're kind of builds that kind of trade in like power for quality of life. Most people hate the quality of life of playing Explosive Arrow. Most people dislike playing minions after a while because your clear speed has a cap. And people dislike playing trap builds at the end because they just don't like how you have to aim the traps and stuff like that. But basically, end of week 1, every single build is a league start build that has incredible bossing potential. Now, these are the new top 5 builds, and it's kind of very similar with 2 important additions. Now, Righteous Fire is still king. It's actually increased in popularity. I do think that people have probably realized that the boots are kind of OP on Righteous Fire, and having Aegis Aurora and Melding of the Flesh pretty much makes the character unkillable. A lot of people try out Righteous Fire, and it's just this really, really smooth experience. Like, the mapping experience is super good. You do enough damage to kill bosses, and it's pretty much a character that just does not really die. And it's not really that expensive either to get set up. You just need to buy an Aegis Aurora, you get a Melding, you get your Legacy of Fury boots, and you're pretty much set to go. Now, Lightning Strike has moved up from 5th place and is now the second most popular build by far. And the interesting thing about Lightning Strike is, sadly, Champion has overtaken everything. Now, Champion is a very, very strong ascendancy for Lightning Strike, and it is a build that kind of gets off the ground really easily because you don't actually need to use Mage Blood. If you do look at the snapshot over here, 45% of the people are still using Perseverance instead of using Headhunter or Mage Blood. And that just goes to show you the power of Perseverance. Well, actually 82%, I misspoke. 82% of champions use Perseverance. So this option alone makes Champion a much more budget-friendly option. It has a lot more power at the early game. So you can see here that Raider and Berserker is languishing far behind, with Berserker probably falling out of favor because it is just too hard to play. And it's not as tanky and simple to play as Champion. Now, something to note is that most people have farmed their Omnis or Omnisciences. There's that 75% Omniscience. Lethal Pride is being used by mostly everyone. Mantra of Flames, everyone has realized, is just completely busted. And Inspire Learning has become the new Headhunter. Everyone is running almost one Inspire Learning, and Bottle Faith is still being used. And Forbidden Flame and Flesh, most people use. And it is nice to see that 17% of people have actually picked up a Headhunter. And 15% of the people want to be immortal and run Melding of the Flesh to probably try to get 90% all res. Now, the biggest distinction is still that not many people actually use Secrets of Suffering. If you look at Interrogation, it's 22%. And of the 22%, most of the people are Berserkers. Now, next up, we have the minion favorite, which is Summon Skeletons. And Summon Skeletons remains the only minion build near the top, but I do think that Summon Skeletons is probably the only way to currently really play minions. So if we look at Summon Skeletons, what can we actually see? So Summon Skeletons is definitely nowhere near as popular before. It's a 99% Necromancer, 99% run the Jewel to play Skelly Mages. And it is nice to see most people are running Aegis Aurora and they're trying to become near immortal. And this is pretty much a common theme through all of these top builds, is that people want to be tanky. People want to do the endgame content. People do not like to die. And it is nice that GGG has added a lot of defenses into the game, and even softcore players are taking advantage of it, and it's very easily seen through people's gear choices. Now, next up we have the favorite build of them all, Cyclone. Cyclone is a build that is almost always near the top, and the reason being that people love Caulk. And there's no other way of putting it. People gobble that stuff up. Now, the favorite type of Caulk that people like is not the pointy Ice Spear type. It is the Forbidden kind with Forbidden Right. And this is actually something that has changed a lot, because Ice Spear and Ice Nova used to completely dominate Cast on Crit and Cyclone. But now 48% of people are playing Forbidden Right. And the reason behind this is because people love being tanky again. People don't want to play a super squishy build like Cast on Crit Ice Spear, where you can't really use Aegis Aurora. So if you look at Aegis Aurora, every single person is playing Forbidden Right pretty much. And then there's a few people that might dabble in Ice Spear. But basically, Forbidden Right is played because it has the damage and it also has the tankiness, and it's pretty easy to get off the ground. In order to get a lot of damage with Ice Spear, you have to have extremely, extremely good gear. And a lot of people are wearing Shavs and Prism Guardian, and Shavs and Prism Guardian is pretty much a recipe for disaster in the sense that you'll be very, very squishy. Now, another interesting thing to note is that Cast on Crit Ice Spear seems to be a very, very expensive build, or people who play it have a very expensive taste. And 56% of people use Mage Blood. And let's say Forbidden Right, what percentage of people use Mage Blood? Well, 78%, man. I guess Cast on Crit, everyone uses Mage Blood. Cast on Crit is the #1 Mage Blood build user, right? Let's go see Righteous Fire. Righteous Fire is 30%. Lightning Strike should be very low because 21%. And Summon Skeletons, 25%. Yeah, so Cast on Crit. The reason being behind this is that Cast on Crit is a build that you really need Mage Blood, because Headhunter or Inspired Learning kind of breaks your trigger rate. If you have too much attack speed or more attack speed randomly, you could literally cut your damage in half. Now, next up, we have Spark. And Spark is a build that people love also because they love being tanky. Guess what, right? it is a very common theme. Melding of the Flesh is very, very high up there. Even on Spark, people still run Aegis Aurora, with most of them being an Inquisitor. There's a very common theme you'll start to see is that Inquisitor, Righteous Fire, Aegis Aurora, and Melding of the Flesh. And if you're Elemental build, use Nebulous to get a bunch of damage. Now, the reason why Nebulous is so strong is because you actually get 20% increase cold damage per 1% cold res above 75%. So if you have 90% cold res and 90% lightning res, you actually have 600% cold damage and lightning damage combined together. Now, most people are using Ashes of the Star, and 51% of the people have Mage Blood on Spark. Now, most people do default to Inquisitor, in my opinion, because Inquisitor is a lot more affordable than going Aura Stacker on Champion or Ascendant. So if you actually look at Spark, the majority of people are actually playing it on Inquisitor. Wait, is it actually true that 0.8%? That cannot be right. Let's go. I think I clicked something. So if we look at Spark over here, Spark, 22% are on Champion, and 38% are on Inquisitor, and 11% on Occultist. That's actually pretty interesting. It does seem like there's a different Spark build with Poison Spark. That's pretty cool that people are trying out. Always nice to see different builds. And lastly, you have the mega budget of Ascendant on Spark. But very diverse ascendancies, and there's even Assassin Spark for people who are doing even more poison, it seems like. Or people playing Assassin Spark for part of a duo carry group. And it's nice to see that there's so many different ways of playing these top builds of Cast on Crit and Spark, and even Lightning Strike. You have different ways to play it with different ascendancies. Inquisitor, Righteous Fire, and Summon Skeletons are all Necromancers, unfortunately, so not much diversity there. Now, this brings us up to our next problem, which is the Headhunter Dilemma and why Headhunter would not be the overwhelmingly popular. And that's pretty much because most of the top builds do not use Headhunter, and it's just not good with them in the build. So we currently look at what percentage of builds actually use Headhunter, and it is surprisingly low at 11%. This time last league, I think you'll probably be looking at 22%. So even last league, at the end of the league, Mage Blood still outclassed Headhunter, and even today, I'm pretty sure Mage Blood is at 27%, and Headhunter is all the way down there. Now, out of all of the top 5 builds, only Lightning Strike is super good with Headhunter, but most people play Champion. And if you look at Champion, 85% of Champions actually use Perseverance. And like I said before, Cast on Crit builds usually resort to Mage Blood because Headhunter or Inspired Learning actually ruins their trigger rate, so they do a lot less damage. And do I think that this will actually change that much? I think the biggest thing is if Tornado Shot or Kinetic Blast or Blade Vortex would get more popular, then Headhunter could be potentially higher than just 11%. Now, you might be wondering, what are some honorable mentions besides the top 5 builds? Now, Explosive Arrow and Seismic Trap are builds that have completely fallen out of the favor as people have ditched their League starters for better builds or better quality of life builds. And Kinetic Blast is something that I saw that got pretty popular, mainly because everyone is trying to Magic Find on Deadeye. And the way you can tell if a build is being used for Magic Finding is you go look at Kinetic Blast, and you can see here 50% of the people actually are using Gold Worm. And this is actually a build that kind of relies on Headhunter, as 62% of people using Headhunter at the moment. And Forbidden Flame and Flesh is like mandatory for the build. And Tornado Shot is a build that will eventually enter the top 5. Sooner or later, people will realize they love bow builds, and it is something that will just never stop. Tornado Shot will definitely probably be right behind Lightning Strike or surpassing Lightning Strike soon enough. And you will see Phantasmal Cremation is also up there. A lot of people like farming Simulacrums. And Phantasmal Cremation is another really, kind of like a really good boss killer build that takes advantage of your favorite combination of probably Aegis Aurora, right? Let's go look at Phantasmal Cremation, and where is it? And yep, 98% Aegis Aurora. Blade Vortex is not completely dead. It's at 2% play rate, and this is after receiving nerf after nerf. So maybe one day Blade Vortex could reclaim its throne as one of the most popular skills, but probably not anytime soon. And let's see, Blade Vortex is a Headhunter build, and it's at 41% Headhunter. So you can see here, a lot of the builds that actually benefit from Fizz conversion, you can use Headhunter a lot more, and Headhunter is actually more used on Tornado Shot than Mage Blood. Now, Overall, I do think the meta is pretty diverse and there's a lot of different options for different scenarios, and there's also a lot of different options for ascendancies on each skill. Now, the meta might seem stale mainly because all these builds are pretty much identical to last league. Besides Righteous Fire, I do think Righteous Fire is the biggest game changer of the league. And the biggest loser is definitely Poisonous Concoction. I think the new skill Allure has kind of worn off. Poisonous Concoction doesn't really excel at anything. If you play the Occultist version, your boss damage is just atrocious. If you play the Pathfinder version, it's just not really that exciting to play. It's not the greatest clear, and the boss damage is not the greatest either, and it's not exactly the tankiest build either. So the biggest thing about all of these builds is that Aegis, Aurora, and Melding at the Flesh probably needs a little bit of tuning. It's probably a little bit too strong, and it does seem like people do not enjoy dying even in softcore. So the builds really do reflect that in both the ascendancy choices and the unique selection. But thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know down in the comments below what build you're currently playing right now, and what's your favorite build out of the bunch. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Mirrors, Exalts, and Mage Bloods than me, and see you next time. Bye!